The fluorescent lights in this lab have a specific hum, a low electric buzz that sits in your teeth. It's the sound of isolation. Most people hate it. I learned to love it because it was the only time I could breathe without my chest tightening. I didn't start working the graveyard shift because I'm a night owl or because the PCR machine is free at 3 a.m. I did it because at 2 p.m., the sun hits the fume hood at an angle that lights up Dr. Clara Hayes' profile, and I realized I couldn't function while looking at it. I came here to work, to focus. But the first time I saw her, focus became the problem. I didn't come to this town for the scenery. I came because the research grant at my city university dried up, and honestly, I was tired of the noise. I wanted silence. I wanted a place where the only thing demanding my attention was data. This university sits in the middle of cornfields and old timber, miles from anything that moves faster than a tractor. It felt like a sanctuary. Or a bunker. I drove in under a gray sky, the road stretching out like a flat gray ribbon. No distractions. That was the plan. Just the work. I walked into the main lab on a Tuesday. It smelled like ethanol, ozone, and stale coffee. She was standing by the centrifuge. Dr. Hayes. She didn't look up immediately. She was calibrating a pipette, her hands moving with a terrifying kind of steadiness. No wasted motion. Efficient. Brutal, almost. I stood in the doorway, holding my transfer papers, just watching her thumb depress the plunger. Click, release. Click, release. It was hypnotic. The room was cold, climate-controlled for the samples, but she was in short sleeves. When she finally turned, her eyes were dark, unreadable. Not cold, just assessed. Like I was another variable she needed to account for, a contaminant in her clean room. "You're the transfer," she said, not a question, a statement of fact. I stepped forward, boots squeaking on the linoleum. "Eliza," I said. I put my hand out. She took it. Her skin was rougher than I expected. Calloused palm, warm fingers. A shock went up my arm, settling heavy in my chest. It wasn't a spark. Sparks are cheap. This was a thud, a heavy, solid weight dropping into the bottom of my stomach. She held on for a fraction of a second longer than professional courtesy required. Or maybe I just imagined that because I didn't want to let go. She smelled like rain and chemicals. "We have a lot of work to do," she said, releasing me. "Don't slow me down." I didn't slow her down. I matched her pace. For the first month, that was the game. She was the most efficient creature I'd ever seen. She moved through the lab like she owned the air inside it. I set up my station across the bench from her, close enough to hear her breathe when the HVAC cycled off, far enough to pretend I wasn't watching. But I was always watching. I learned her habits quickly. The way she tapped her pen against her temple when the data didn't line up, the way she rolled her sleeves up exactly 2 folds, revealing the tendons in her forearms, the way she drank her coffee black, staring out the window at the empty fields, like she was looking for something that wasn't there. It wasn't romantic at first. It was admiration. Then it was envy. Then it was something that made my throat tight. We shared the space in a comfortable silence that started to feel thick. One afternoon, she dropped a slide. We both reached for it. Our shoulders brushed. Just a graze of cotton against cotton, heat against heat. I pulled back like I'd been burned. She didn't flinch. She just looked at me, that unreadable gaze sharpening. "Careful," she murmured. I didn't know if she meant the glass or something else. I went back to my microscope, but my hands were shaking. I couldn't focus on the cells. I could only focus on the ghost of her warmth on my arm. That was the moment the panic set in. I wasn't just observing her anymore. I was mapping her. And in a town this small, in a lab this quiet, there is nowhere to hide a map like that. I knew I had to leave the daylight behind. You learn a person by their hands first. In a lab, hands are everything. They are the difference between a breakthrough and a waste of 3 months' funding. I spent weeks just watching Clara's hands. She didn't treat the equipment with reverence. She treated it with expectation. She handled the micropipettes like tools that owed her precision. I'd be at my bench, ostensibly running a gel electrophoresis, but my focus was entirely on the way her fingers tightened around a glass beaker. Her knuckles were often dry, the skin around her nails rough from washing them 40 times a day. There was no vanity in her movements, just a terrifying competence. I caught myself cataloging these details like data points. The way she labeled her tubes with a Sharpie, the cap held between her teeth because she wouldn't put it down on a non-sterile surface, the way she leaned her hip against the counter while waiting for the centrifuge to spin down, arms crossed, staring at the timer like she could intimidate the seconds into moving faster. It was a study in controlled force. And I was the one losing control. The silence in the room became a physical thing. The constant hum of the ultra-low freezer and the fluorescent buzz overhead created a soundscape that amplified every small noise she made. The scratch of her pen on paper, the squeak of her chair, the sharp intake of breath when a result wasn't what she wanted. I found myself timing my own breathing to hers, which is a dangerous kind of synchronization. It makes you feel connected to someone who hasn't even spoken your name in 3 hours. One afternoon, the department head, a loud man named Dr. Aris, came in to check on the grant progress. I kept my head down, counting colonies on a petri dish, but I was listening. Clara's voice shifted when she spoke to him. It dropped an octave, becoming smoother, guarded. She defended her data with a calm, ironclad logic that made him stumble over his own questions. "The numbers hold, David," she said. "The variable isn't the sample, it's the timeline." When he finally left, the door clicking shut, she let out a long, slow exhale. She didn't look at me, but she said, loud enough to bridge the gap between our benches, "Some people like to hear themselves talk. I prefer the quiet." It felt like she had handed me a secret, a small, jagged piece of herself. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My heart was thudding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I just nodded at my microscope, hoping my neck wasn't as flushed as it felt. The proximity was worse than the distance. The lab was spacious, but the meaningful work happened in tight corners. The fume hood, the microscope station, the darkroom. There was a day we had to review a Western blot together. The film was faint. She called me over. "Look at this," she said. "Tell me what you see." I stepped into her space. There was no other way to do it. I had to lean in, my shoulder hovering an inch from hers. The air between us thickened instantly. It felt heavy, charged, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm breaks over the plains. I could smell her, not perfume, but the clean, sharp scent of unscented soap and the bitter underlying note of coffee. She pointed at a band on the film, her finger close enough to mine that I could feel the radiant heat of her skin. "It's faint," I managed to say. My voice sounded wrecked to my own ears. "But it's there." She turned her head. We were close. Too close. I could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the specks of gold in her irises that you couldn't see from across the room. She didn't pull back. She held her ground, her gaze dropping to my mouth for a fraction of a second before snapping back to the film. "Good eye," she murmured. The praise was professional, but the tone was low, intimate. It vibrated in my chest. That was the moment the fear really set in. It wasn't just that I wanted her. It was that she was my supervisor. She held my career in those capable, rough hands. In a town this small, where everyone knew everyone's truck by the sound of its engine, a scandal wouldn't just be a problem. It would be an exile. I was standing on the edge of a cliff, and every time she looked at me with that unreadable, intense focus, I felt the urge to jump. I knew with a sinking, desperate clarity that I couldn't stay in the daylight with her. The temptation to reach out, to close that 1-inch gap, was becoming a physical ache I couldn't ignore. I had to remove the variable. I had to run. I realized I was in trouble when the silence of the cornfield stopped feeling oppressive and started feeling like a frame for her. I'd catch myself driving past the university on weekends just to see if her car was in the lot. That silver sedan became a landmark, a beacon. I wasn't just working there anymore. I was living in the orbit of Dr. Clara Hayes. And that was terrifying. because I've been the person who loses themselves in someone else before. I know the signs. The way your own schedule starts to bend around theirs. The way you hold a question in your throat just to hear them ask it first. I was becoming a satellite, and satellites burn up if they get too close. The lab wasn't just a workplace anymore. It was a minefield where every shared glance felt like a detonation. So I changed the variables. I went to the scheduling board on a Friday evening when I knew she'd be gone, and I erased my name from the 9 to 5 blocks. I moved everything. PCR runs at 2 a.m., cell cultures at midnight, data analysis in the dead hours before dawn. I told myself it was for the equipment. Better access, I mumbled to an empty room. Fewer distractions. The first night was strange. The building breathes differently when it's empty. The HVAC rattles louder. The darkness presses against the windows, turning them into black mirrors. I could see my own reflection, pale, tired, alone, superimposed over the dark fields outside. It was exactly what I wanted. Isolation, safety. I didn't have to worry about my hands shaking when she walked in. I didn't have to worry about the flush rising on my neck when she leaned over my shoulder. The air was cold and empty. It smelled of cleaning solvent, not coffee and rain. It was sterile. But you can't scrub a presence out of a room just by changing the clock. Her ghost was everywhere. I'd open the logbook to sign in, and her handwriting would be the last entry. Sharp, angular letters in blue ink. Centrifuge balanced, rotor checked. Just seeing her signature made my pulse jump. I'd traced the indentations her pen left on the page, feeling the pressure she had applied hours earlier. It was pathetic. I knew it was pathetic. I was a grown woman standing in a dark lab at 3 a.m, haunting the space she occupied in the daylight. I missed the sound of her. That was the worst part. I missed the scratching of her pen and the specific rhythm of her typing. The silence I had craved suddenly felt heavy, like water filling up the room. I worked harder to drown it out. I generated more data in 2 weeks than I had in the previous 2 months. My notebook filled up. My eyes burned. The town noticed, of course. In a place this small, invisibility is impossible. The woman at the gas station, where I bought my terrible coffee at 5 a.m., started calling me the vampire. My landlord, a sweet, prying woman named Mrs. Gable, asked if I was in some kind of trouble. "You look like you've been fighting ghosts, honey," she said one morning as I stumbled in, blindingly tired. "Just work," I told her, clutching my keys. "Just science." I looked wrecked. Dark circles, skin pale from lack of sun. My hands had a permanent tremor from the caffeine. But I told myself it was working. I was safe. I was productive. I was keeping the dangerous variable, Clara, out of the equation. I thought I was being smart. I thought I was being professional. I didn't realize that by removing myself, I was creating a void. And voids, by their nature, demand to be filled. I thought I was hiding. I didn't know I was just making my absence loud. You can't hide from a scientist. That was my flaw. I treated my absence like a shield, assuming that if I removed myself from the equation, the data would settle. But Clara Hayes made her career by noticing the things that didn't fit the pattern. I had become a glaring anomaly in her dataset, and anomalies always demand investigation. I thought I was being clever with the schedule, but shifts bleed. Experiments run long. I'd walk in at 6 p.m., hoping to see her silver sedan leaving. Instead, I'd find her sitting at her desk, illuminated by the blue glow of her monitor. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, pressurized. She looked up, her glasses sliding down her nose. She didn't offer a polite smile. She just scanned my pale skin, the dark circles, the tremor. "You look like hell, Eliza," she said. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the hum of the ventilation like a scalpel. "I'm productive," I countered, moving to my bench. "I'm getting the data." "You're gray," she stated, ignoring my defense. "And you're shaking." She stood up, the scrape of her chair loud in the quiet room. She walked over to my station, stopping just inside the boundary of my personal space. The heat radiating off her was palpable. "Is the work too much? Do we need to adjust the parameters?" "The work is fine," I said. I just focus better at night. Focus, she repeated. The word sounded heavy in her mouth. She simply didn't buy it. Because she didn't buy it, she started testing the hypothesis. She scheduled mandatory maintenance during crossover hours, tasks that required 4 hands, changing the heavy CO2 tanks, re-racking the cryo storage. She was forcing the physical proximity I was trying to starve. We were in the narrow aisle between the incubators, the air warm and smelling of dry yeast. I was holding the heavy steel tank. She was securing the valve. "Tighten it," she ordered. I reached in. My forearm brushed against her bicep. The contact was brief, accidental, but it felt like grabbing a live wire. I jerked back, nearly dropping the wrench. She didn't move. She just looked at me, her expression unreadable in the harsh light. "Steady," she murmured. "You used to have steady hands, Eliza. What changed?" I couldn't answer. I fled to the cold room, ostensibly to inventory antibodies, but really to breathe air that didn't smell like her coffee. The door wasn't fully latched. I heard voices in the main lab. Clara and Dr. Eris. "Your transfer is a ghost," Eris boomed. "I never see her." "She works," Clara said. Her tone was defensive, sharp. "She works odd hours. Is she avoiding the department? Or is she avoiding you?" The silence that followed was louder than the compressor fans next to my head. "She's adjusting," Clara said finally, but the hesitation gave her away. She knew. She was calculating the probability. The breaking point happened on a Thursday. I was exhausted, my vision blurring at the edges. I was setting up a rack of tubes and my grip failed. They scattered across the floor, a plastic rain. I dropped to my knees to gather them. Clara was there instantly. She knelt opposite me. We were both scrambling for plastic on the cold linoleum. I reached for a stray tube. She reached for the same one. Our fingers locked. I froze. She didn't pull away. She held my gaze, her eyes searching my face with a terrifying intensity. I could feel the pulse in her fingertips against mine. Thud, thud, thud. My face burned. I knew I was flushing, the heat creeping up my neck, a betrayal of everything I was trying to hide. "You're burning up," she whispered. She wasn't talking about a fever. "I'm tired," I choked out. "Liar," she said. Softly, without malice, just a calm statement of fact. She let go of the tube, but she didn't stand up. She stayed there, on her knees, forcing me to look at her. "You can't work in the dark forever, Eliza. Eventually, the sun comes up." I scrambled up, clutching the plastic, and retreated. But the air changed. The tension wasn't unspoken anymore. It was vibrating in the space between us, waiting for a spark. The door didn't just close. It clicked with a mechanical finality that sounded like a judge's gavel hitting the bench. I froze. The sound of the latch engaging echoed in the high ceilings of the lab, bouncing off the stainless steel and the glass, amplifying the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure. It was 2:14 a.m. The building should have been dead. I had checked the logbook. I had checked the parking lot. The silver sedan hadn't been there. I turned slowly, my hand gripping the edge of the lab bench, tight enough to turn my knuckles white. Clara was standing by the door. She wasn't wearing her white coat. She was in a dark sweater, her hair pulled back in a way that looked hasty, messy. She looked tired. The fluorescent lights above us were on their night cycle, half power, flickering with a low, sickly hum that usually comforted me. Tonight, it made the shadows under her eyes look like bruises. She didn't look like a supervisor. She looked like a storm front that had finally made landfall. "We need to stop this," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the silence of the empty building, it sounded like a shout. I tried to swallow, but my throat was dry, like I'd swallowed dust. "I'm just finishing the PCR run," I lied. It was a reflex, a survival instinct. I needed the machine. "The machine was free all afternoon," she countered. She pushed off the doorframe and took a step toward me, then another. Her boots were silent on the linoleum, which somehow made her approach more terrifying. "I checked the logs, Eliza. You haven't been in this room before sunset in 3 weeks. You're not scheduling for efficiency. You're scheduling for avoidance." I turned back to my samples, staring blindly at the rows of clear liquid. I work better in quiet. "You're lying." The word hung there. She was close now. I could feel her presence like a radiant heat source at my back. The air in the lab, usually smelling of sterile alcohol and cold metal, suddenly smelled like her. That distinct mix of rain, old paper, and the vanilla note of her shampoo. It was dizzying. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, thudding rhythm that felt loud enough to give me away. I clutched my notebook to my chest, a flimsy shield against the reality of her standing 3 feet away. "I'm not trying to be difficult," I whispered. "I didn't say you were difficult. I said you were hiding." She moved around the bench, forcing herself into my line of sight. I couldn't look at the floor anymore. I had to look at her. And that was the mistake. The overhead light at the station was old. It had a blue-white cast that was unforgiving. It should have washed her out, made her look harsh or clinical. Instead, it caught the sharp angle of her jawline and the intense, searching darkness of her eyes. It highlighted the stray hairs escaping her bun, turning them into a halo of static gold. She looked wrecked and exhausted, and seeing her this close, with no daylight to soften the edges, felt like looking directly into an eclipse. "Tell me," she demanded, her voice dropping to a hush that vibrated in my bones. "Have I done something? Have I made you feel unsafe? Because if I have, I need to know. I can't fix it if I don't know why you can't stand to be in the same room as me." The hurt in her voice broke me. She thought she was the villain. She thought she was driving me away with incompetence or cruelty, when the truth was so much more dangerous. She took a step closer, invading the last inch of my personal space. Her hand twitched at her side, like she wanted to reach out, but stopped herself. "It's not you," I said, my voice shaking. "Then what? Is it the work? Is it the town?" "It's the light," I blurted out. The words bypassed my brain entirely. She blinked, confusion furrowing her brow. "The light? We can fix the ballast. We can—" "No," I interrupted, the desperation finally cresting. I couldn't hold it back anymore. The fatigue, the longing, the weeks of starving myself of her presence, only to be cornered by it, it all collapsed. I looked her dead in the eyes, unflinching for the first time since I arrived. "It's not the ballast, Clara. It's what the light does to you." She went still. "What are you talking about?" "I work at night," I said, the truth spilling out like blood from a fresh wound. "Because in the day, the sun hits your desk, and I can't think. I can't function." I took a breath that shuddered in my lungs. "And even now, I work the night shift because this fluorescent light makes you look too beautiful to ignore." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was a physical weight, heavy and pressurized, like the air inside a diving bell. The hum of the ultra-low freezer seemed to stop, or maybe my ears just stopped processing it. I watched her face, terrified of what I would find there. I expected disgust. I expected the professional mask to slam down like a shutter, followed by a citation of the University Code of Conduct and an order to pack my things. I was ready for the exile. My muscles were coiled, tight as springs, prepared to run out the door and drive until I hit the state line. But the mask didn't fall. Clara didn't move. She stood absolutely still, frozen in the harsh, blue-white glare of the overheads. Her eyes, usually so guarded and analytical, widened just a fraction. The pupils dilated, swallowing the gold flecks I had spent so many hours memorizing from across the room. She didn't breathe. I didn't breathe. We were two volatile chemicals mixed in a beaker, waiting for the reaction to stabilize or explode. "Beautiful," she repeated. The word sounded foreign in her mouth, rough and unpolished, like she was testing its density. She looked down at her hands, those capable, calloused hands that could manipulate a pipette with micron-level precision, and then back up at me. The exhaustion that had been carving lines into her face seemed to crack, revealing something raw and terrified underneath. "I thought you couldn't stand me," she whispered. Her voice was a low thrum that vibrated in the floorboards. "I thought I was too hard on you, too demanding. I thought you were working nights to escape my voice." "I was working nights to escape the way I want to listen to it," I corrected. The filter was gone. The dam had broken, and I couldn't stop the truth from flooding the sterile room. I was escaping the way you look when you figure out a problem, the way you chew your lip when the data doesn't fit, The way you smell like rain and ozone. She took a step closer. The distance between us evaporated. You noticed that? She asked, the question hanging in the air like smoke. Because I noticed that you always check the safety shower 3 times before you start an experiment. I noticed that you hum when you're pipetting, but only when you think the compressor fans are loud enough to hide it. I noticed that you wear that gray sweater when you're cold, and I've almost offered you my coat 12 times. She paused, her gaze dropping to my mouth for a heartbeat, before snapping back to my eyes with a fierce intensity. I didn't offer it because I didn't trust myself to take it off. The world tilted on its axis. It wasn't just me. The map I had been drawing of her, she had been drawing one of me. The data points I thought I was hiding, the trembling hands, the stolen glances, the frantic avoidance, she had cataloged them all. But she hadn't read them as fear of her authority. She had read them as rejection of her person. She reached out then. It was a slow, deliberate movement, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to retreat into the safety of professionalism. I didn't move. Her fingers brushed the back of my hand, the one still clutching the lab notebook against my chest like a shield. The contact was electric. It wasn't a spark, it was a circuit completing. The heat of her skin seared through the cold, conditioned air of the lab. My breath hitched, a ragged sound that seemed far too loud in the quiet. Her hand settled over mine, warm and rough and solid. She didn't pull me closer. She just anchored me, grounded me. "This is a problem, Eliza," she murmured. Her thumb brushed over my knuckles, a soothing, rhythmic motion that was completely at odds with the panic hammering in my chest. "I know," I whispered. My voice felt wrecked. "I know." "We are in a glass house," she said, her eyes scanning the dark windows that reflected us back. 2 figures standing too close under the clinical light. "This town talks. The department talks. If we..." She trailed off, the reality of the risks settling over us like dust. I knew what she meant. In a city, you can disappear. Here, everyone knows whose truck is parked where. Everyone knows who buys coffee together. A relationship between a supervisor and a student wouldn't just be a scandal. It would be a career-ending event. It would be judgment from the church pews and whispers in the grocery store aisle. "I can leave," I offered, though the words tasted like ash. "I can transfer back to the city, find another lab. I can remove the variable." Clara's grip on my hand tightened, sharp, possessive. "No." The word was immediate, instinctive. "No, you're not leaving. You're the best researcher I've had in 5 years. And..." She swallowed hard, her throat working. "And I don't want you to go." "Then what do we do?" I asked, desperation bleeding into my tone. "I can't turn this off, Clara. I can't go back to the day shift and pretend I don't want to lean across the bench and..." "Then don't pretend," she cut in. "But be careful. Be quiet." She looked at me with a fierce, terrifying intensity, the kind she usually reserved for defending her thesis. "Can you do that? Can you stay in the dark with me a little longer? Can you hide this?" I looked at her. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, casting long shadows across her face, highlighting the vulnerability in her eyes and the strength in her jaw. She looked beautiful. Terrifyingly, achingly beautiful. "Yes," I said. "I can do that." The relief that washed over her face was palpable. Her shoulders dropped, the tension in her jaw eased. But the air between us didn't cool down. It just changed. It went from the tension of avoidance to the tension of a secret kept. We were conspirators now, bound not just by the work, but by the dangerous magnetic pull of the unspoken. We became experts in the geometry of plausible deniability. In the lab, we maintained a distance of exactly 3 feet, the width of a standard bench. We spoke in data points and protocol numbers. If she needed to hand me a sample, she placed it on the counter first, waiting for her hand to clear the space before I reached for it. It was a choreography of absence. To an outsider, it looked like professional detachment. To me, it felt like holding my breath underwater. But the silence between us had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was heavy with the things we weren't saying. When the other grad students left for the day, the air in the room would shift. The static charge would rise. We didn't touch. We were too paranoid for that. But we existed in the same magnetic field. I could feel where she was in the room without looking up from my microscope. I tracked her by the sound of her boots on the tile, by the rustle of her lab coat, by the scent of rain and ozone that seemed to follow her like a personal weather system. We stole our moments in the spaces where the town couldn't see us. There's a fire road behind the old stadium, a stretch of gravel that cuts through the timber and ends at a rusted water tower. We met there on Sunday mornings, parking our cars a mile apart. We walked with a careful gap between our shoulders, just in case a hunter or a lost freshman stumbled onto the path. "You redlined my abstract," I said one morning, kicking a pine cone into the brush. The air was cold, sharp with frost. "You bled ink all over the methodology section." "The methodology was weak," Clara said. She didn't look at me. She was watching a hawk circle the field. "If I go easy on you, they'll know. Eris is already sniffing around. He asked Barb why you're suddenly on the day shift rotation again." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I needed your hands for the heavy lifting." She glanced at me then, the corner of her mouth twitching upward. "Which is true. You have good hands." The compliment hit me in the chest, warm and solid. It was these small, dry admissions that kept me fed. But the professional strain was real. In the lab, she was harder on me than anyone else. She scrutinized my logs with a forensic intensity. She made me repeat a titration 3 times because the variance was 0.01 off the baseline. I knew it was theater, a performance for the invisible audience of the department, but it wore me down. I went home with my jaw aching from clenching my teeth. The town didn't help. Small towns have a way of pressing in on you. My landlord, Mrs. Gable, stopped me by the mailboxes on a Tuesday. "You're spending a lot of time at the university, honey," she said, her eyes crinkling with a curiosity that felt dangerous. "I see Dr. Hayes' car there late, too. You girls working on a cure for something?" "Just research," I said, forcing a smile that felt too tight. "Just deadlines." "Well, don't work too hard. People talk about women who don't have lives outside that building." I told Clara about it later, when we were alone in the darkroom developing film. The red safety light turned the room into a womb, cutting us off from the rest of the world. "They talk," Clara said quietly. She was leaning against the counter, watching the image bloom on the paper in the developer tray. "My family has been in this county for 4 generations, Eliza. My grandfather built the silo you can see from the highway. If they find out, it's not just a job I lose. It's the ground I stand on." "I know," I whispered. I moved closer. The red light made her look softer, blurring the sharp edges of her exhaustion. "I'm just tired of hiding." "I know." She reached out, her fingers brushing the fabric of my sleeve. It wasn't skin on skin, but the friction sent a shockwave through me. "But look at you. You're focused. You're terrified, but you're still standing here. That focus. It's the most attractive thing I've ever seen." She pulled her hand back before I could lean into it. The timer beeped. The moment broke. We went back to the chemistry, washing the film, drying our hands, but the ache remained. We were navigating a minefield, and every day we didn't explode felt like a victory and a warning. We were surviving, but we weren't living, and the pressure inside the glass house was starting to crack the pane. The storm broke the humidity first, then it tried to break the building. It had been raining for 3 days, a relentless deluge that turned the cornfields into swamps and made the old timber of the science hall groan. At 3 a.m., the grid finally gave up. The power surged, flaring the fluorescent lights white hot before they died, plunging the lab into heavy darkness. The backup generator roared to life in the basement, but the transition wasn't clean. The ventilation system shuddered and failed. Then the alarm started. It wasn't the fire alarm. It was the oxygen displacement sensor in the cryo-storage room. I didn't think. I simply ran. The cryo room is a windowless concrete box in the basement where we keep the liquid nitrogen tanks and volatile samples. If the ventilation fails and a tank leaks, that room becomes a tomb in under 2 minutes. I hit the stairs, boots slamming against metal treads, the red emergency strobe washing the stairwell in pulses of blood-colored light. Clara was already there. She was inside the threshold. The heavy steel blast door was jammed. The magnetic lock had failed halfway, and she was throwing her entire weight against the manual override wheel. Inside, I saw white fog rolling across the floor. A nitrogen line had blown. The cloud was rising, displacing the air, creeping toward the intake vents that weren't pulling anymore. "Get back!" she screamed, seeing me. Her voice was ragged, distorted by panic and the noise. "The seal is broken! Stay back!" She was trying to close the door from the inside to contain the leak, trapping herself with the gas. Logical, but suicidal. I didn't stay back. I lunged past the safety line. The cold hit me instantly, a physical wall of freezing air that burned my lungs. I grabbed the other side of the wheel. The metal was ice cold, biting into my skin. Clara looked at me, eyes wide, dark holes in the red flashing light. She looked terrified. Not for herself, for me. "Turn it!" I yelled. "Together!" She didn't argue. We hauled on the iron wheel. My boot slipped on the condensation, slicking the floor. I felt the strain in my shoulders, the tearing sensation in my muscles. We grunted in unison, a raw sound of effort. The wheel groaned, rust grinding against rust, and then slipped a fraction, then an inch. Then it spun. We slammed the door shut and engaged the lock. The hiss of gas cut off. The alarm shrieked for another 10 seconds before the system registered the containment and fell silent. We collapsed. We slid down the wall to the concrete floor, gasping for air that didn't taste like frost. The adrenaline crash was instant. My hands shook so hard I couldn't unclench them. "You idiot," Clara whispered. Her head was tipped back against the wall, chest heaving. "You absolute idiot." "You were inside," I managed to say. "You were locking yourself in." "It's my lab," she said, as if that explained dying for it. She turned to look at me. The emergency light caught the sweat on her forehead. She reached out, hand trembling, and grabbed my wrist, fingers digging into my pulse point. Verifying. I thought... Her voice cracked. The composure she wore like armor shattered. "When I saw you on the stairs, I didn't care about the samples. I was just terrified." She pulled me. It wasn't gentle. She yanked me across the dirty concrete until our knees collided. She gripped my face between her hands, palms rough and cold. "I can't do this," she breathed. "I can't watch you walk into fire or ice for me. I can't lose you, Eliza. The work isn't worth it. None of it matters if you're not there." The truth settled over us, heavier than the storm outside. The variable had changed. We weren't colleagues protecting a secret anymore. We were two people realizing that the only thing more dangerous than exposure was silence. "Then we stop," I whispered, leaning into her touch. "We stop pretending the work is the only thing that matters." She made a sound, half sob, half laugh, and pulled me forward. Her forehead rested against mine. We breathed the same air, dust and diesel. "We fix this," she promised, voice fierce, vibrating against my skin. "We survive the storm, and then we fix this." I closed my eyes. The alarm was gone. The only sound left was our hearts finally beating in the same rhythm. The paperwork was anticlimactic. It was 3 forms, standard university font, signed in triplicate under the flickering light of Dr. Eris's office. We sat in 2 wooden chairs that scraped against the floor, declaring a consensual relationship with potential conflict of interest. It felt like signing a treaty. We were declaring a new state of existence to the bureaucracy. Eris looked at the papers, looked at the dark circles under Clara's eyes, and then at the stubborn set of my jaw. He grunted, tossing the file onto a stack of grant applications. "Long as the data is clean," he said, "and you don't blow up my cryo room again." That was it. The catastrophe we feared was just a bureaucratic hurdle. But the real work wasn't the forms. It was the calibration of our daily lives. We didn't stop the night shift. We reclaimed it. The lab at 2 a.m. stopped being a place to hide and became a place to build. We worked side by side, a synchronized machine of 2. I ran the PCR cycles, she analyzed the results. The silence wasn't heavy with unspoken tension anymore. It was companionable. It was the sound of two minds moving in the same direction, fueled by the same terrible vending machine coffee. I remember one Tuesday specifically. It was raining again, a soft, steady rhythm against the black glass. Clara was at the whiteboard, sketching out a signaling pathway for a new protein structure. She was wearing a gray wool sweater I had left at her place the night before. That small detail, my wool against her skin, the sleeves rolled up to show those capable forearms, felt more intimate than any touch we could have shared in public. She turned to me, marker in hand, a smudge of blue ink on her cheekbone. "You're staring," she said, not looking away from her diagram. "I'm observing," I corrected, leaning back in my chair. "And what does the data say?" "That you look better in my clothes than I do. It's statistically significant." She laughed. It was a low, rusty sound that she didn't use often, but when she did, it settled in my chest like a warm weight. She capped the marker and walked over to my bench. She didn't stop at the edge of my personal space. She stepped right into it. She put her hands on the edge of the slate counter, trapping me between her and the experiment. "The fluorescent light," she whispered, looking up at the flickering tube above us. "You said it makes me look beautiful." "It does." "It's terrible light, Eliza. It washes everything out. It's clinical." "Not on you. It just strips away the shadows. It shows the truth." We learned to navigate the town, too. Mrs. Gable still gossips by the mailboxes, her eyes sharp as hawks. The gas station clerk still calls me the vampire, though now he adds, "and her shadow," because Clara is usually standing by the door, checking her watch. We don't hold hands in the grocery store. We don't kiss in the parking lot. We are careful. But we are not afraid. The fear has been replaced by a quiet, steady certainty. The weekends changed. Instead of driving past the university to check for her car, I wake up to the sound of her breathing. The farmhouse she rents is drafty, full of books and silence. I learn that she drinks tea on Sundays, not coffee, because she wants to slow down the variables. I learn that she reads trashy sci-fi novels to turn her brain off. I learn that she is softer in the morning light than she ever is under the fluorescence, but I still prefer the lab. I came here looking for isolation. I wanted a bunker. I wanted to be a ghost in a machine. Instead, I found a home in the middle of the cornfields. Not in the silence, but in the noise of a life shared with someone who understands the value of precision. We drive home together now. The silver sedan follows the gravel roads, cutting through the darkness. I watch her profile in the dashboard glow, the sharp nose, the determined set of her mouth, and I don't feel the urge to run. I feel the urge to stay, to calibrate, to measure the rest of my life against the steady, reassuring beat of her pulse. The data is conclusive. I am exactly where I need to be. The lab is quiet tonight. The hum is still there, that electric buzz in the teeth, but it doesn't sound like isolation anymore. It sounds like us. Clara reaches for the light switch, her hand lingering near mine. "Ready?" she asks. "Always," I answer. She kills the lights. The darkness isn't empty. It's full of her. If you've ever found a truth you couldn't hide from, tell me about it in the comments. And subscribe for more stories from the quiet hours.